Hey, all, this is David Ducker coming back at you, and I'm going to dedicate this video to Thomas Patterson. Runs a channel, I believe it's called Wrestling with Role Playing, which is a great channel name. I wish I'd thought of it, and so does Andrew Wood, I'm sure. Thomas has a lot of great videos over on his channel. You should check it out. I think the channel name is like Juice734. Thomas should leave a comment below correcting my my foolishness and not being able to remember what his channel is called, and that way everybody have a link to it as well. He's got a couple of good videos on there. But what this video is about from me today is standard party roles, and it's dedicated to Thomas because he is more of a gamist style player, more of a power gamer than I am, and even he knows standard party rules are trash. I try to keep my videos fairly positive and just give good advice and not bash poor habits, but I already gave my good advice on this, which was my my video on party roles in a literary sense, and I'm still talking to people and they're driving me nuts with their bad habits about standard party rules, so I thought I'm just going to do a video bashing them brutally, so maybe that'll teach some people some lessons and shut them up. Thomas, of course, will be shaking his head, and he'll be very upset because he's always telling me to be nice and smarten up and stop stop bashing things and stop being so negative. So I'm sorry, Thomas, I'm going to let you down because standard party rules are trash. They're garbage. You should never use them. Let's start by defining what they are. What are standard party roles? Standard party roles is the attempt to sit down before the game even starts and make your group, your main characters, your protagonists of your story, make them in such a way that you, as a group, can do everything. So you have one guy who's really good at physical fighting, one guy who's really good at like ranged fighting, one guy who can fly a spaceship, one guy who can repair it, one guy who can use psychic powers, one guy who can heal you with magic, one guy who makes force fields to protect you, someone to curse your enemies with black magic, someone to blast your enemies with red magic perhaps. So you try to have the party that's designed to do everything. Let's talk first about why this is good or how it could be realistic or actually happen. So first off, if you're assembled to do a job, this could make perfect sense. If you're members of a bridge crew for a starship, you're probably going to have a pilot and an engineer and a sensor officer and a gunnery chief. If you're a mercenary company or any kind of military unit, you might have a sniper, a medic, a radio man, someone with a grenade launcher, etc. So there are a few limited circumstances where this can make sense and it's okay. For the vast majority of the time, though, in most party formats, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's not that it doesn't make sense, it's just there's no reason to design it that way from the outset. And the other problem is you just can't cover all your bases. It's just, you know, the characters are too narrow and the possibilities are too broad. In good systems, that's what you're going to run into. So let's start with the bashing. So when does this happen, and why does this happen? Well, typically this happens in a game like Pathfinder, where there are only a very limited variety of options, because then it's actually possible to cover all your bases. So the stereotype is a cleric who heals and protects and buffs, plus a wizard who blasts and curses and summons, plus a frontline fighter who fights at close and far range, because in Pathfinder, archery and swordplay are the exact same stat, and also a rogue for stealth and lockpicking and traps, and they also have some combat ability. So because the classes are so incredibly broad, it is possible to cover all of your bases with just those 4 classes. And this invites, power gaming and metagaming, invites people to try to cover all their bases. It really falls apart in a lot of other games. Like if I look at Warhammer Fantasy, for example, healing and buffing and protecting are 3 completely different things. They're 3 completely different schools of magic. So you need 3 characters if you wanted to be able to do all 3 of them. Or a very, very experienced high-level character to do all 3. Whereas in Pathfinder, you can do all 3 like right off the bat. Same thing with your wizard in Pathfinder. He can blast, curse, and summon. And again, in Warhammer or most other games, you're only going to be able to pick one of those, and then maybe later you could branch into a second, and then maybe later into a third area. But trying to get all 3, it's going to take time and effort and dedication in character. And right from first level, you're just not going to be able to do it. Whereas in Pathfinder, it's so high level right off the bat, first level, I can do all 3 of these things. And by 6th level, I can do 9 other things as well. But I can't ever really improve my fighting ability. I can only improve these areas in Pathfinder up until multi-classing, and then I can't improve those original areas at the same time. It's weird, the Pathfinder system. So, in a system like Pathfinder where it's so broad, people will try to cover all 4. In that game, it's 4 areas. It's really, it's more like 12 different areas. But they can do it with 4 characters in Pathfinder. And you'll see this again and again. Some groups I've even seen sit down, and they're like, okay, who wants to be the fighter? You. Okay. Who wants to be the wizard? You. Okay. Who wants to be the rogue? Oh, you. And I guess you're cleric then. And I've seen people sit down like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're building our standard party roles, our team. And I just look at them like, I don't understand what you're talking about, brother. I'm trying to build like an actual character with like, goals, motivations, personality, plot hooks, appearance, unique fighting style. All these things come like way before I start to think about any mechanical build, and they're just such the opposite. And that can work for like one game if you want to do that, sure. But if you do that again, like wow, now you're really like limited in your options. But you can trade it up and be like, oh, instead of a cleric, you can be a druid. Instead of a fighter, you can be a ranger. Instead of a wizard, you can be a sorcerer. Instead of a rogue, you can be a bard. Maybe works for these guys. I don't even know what works for them because it's so weird to me. But you can change it up a little bit, but not much beyond that. So you're going to end up running a very similar party again and again and again and again. That's going to get boring real quick. Like, I'll get bored the second time you try to pull that on me. Like, the first time it'll be okay. I might get bored the first time if you don't actually make them interesting characters. If you're purely mechanical, I'll be bored the first time. But in theory, if you actually do put in work and make them good characters, the first time will be okay, but I'll get bored the second time. If they're all such similar character concepts. So it's just very weird to me, and yet I see this, and I talk to people, and they're like, oh, who was your cleric in that group? And I'm like, we didn't have a cleric. He's like, oh, you had a druid. I'm like, no. He's like, who did your healing? I'm like, nobody did our healing. What do you mean did our healing? He's like, what about your buffs? And I'm like, there were no buffs. No buffing happened. They're like, how did you survive? And I'm like, you mean survive? Like, we got in a couple fights, but they were scrappy. We We only lost one character. We were okay. They're like, oh my god. And they're like scared. And I'm like, I just don't understand. Because in my games, you don't get in very many fights. When you do, they're all incredibly dangerous. But they'd be incredibly dangerous regardless of your party composition. Because it's a fight. That's why it's a fight and not just a beatdown. I mean, you might beat some people down too. But that's not really a fight. You know, if they're like a bar brawl, you're not going to get killed in a bar brawl. Or even like suppressing a peasant mob. If you're wearing full plate, you can just beat some peasants to the ground and you should be okay most of the time. So it's just so alien a concept to me to start with combat effectiveness. Because, you know, to me, you want to start with interesting storylines and characters and drama. And then if the story takes you into combat, that's one thing. That's okay. But a lot of stories just don't have any combat, you know, or they've had very little combat. I mean, I love combat. You know, I like action movies. But some stories, you know, they might have a fight, but they only have one fight. You know, or they're like revolve around chase scenes and races and racing. You know, you can get just as much drama out of that. I mean, see my video on chase scenes, because I love chase scenes. You can do a whole campaign like Speed Racer style or Death Race style, where there's not really any fighting that goes on, but they can still get all the drama out of other means, other action style scenes. And then maybe throw in one fight scene as well. Why not? So the standard party roles, you know, it's like paint by numbers. And nobody put a paint by numbers painting in an art gallery. It just doesn't happen. So don't paint by numbers. Just paint a scene that nobody's done before. Something interesting to you and unique. Because, you know, if you don't want to play the cleric and you're stuck with the cleric, you're not going to have fun. And if you're not having fun, how are you going to bring fun into the game? If you're not bringing fun, you're draining other people's fun. Then you should be cut from the games. So if as a GM you impose this standard party roles on people, you're just going to end up cutting them anyway. Or at least if I tried to, that's what I'd end up having to do. Because I don't let anybody sit there and not contribute fun to the game. I get rid of them real quick. You're just a wallflower. I just don't have time for that. That's another thing Thomas would yell at me about. He thinks you should put up with anybody who shows up in your game. I'll be nice to everybody who shows up. I won't keep them though. I'll get rid of them if they're not bringing some thunder. Or some lightning. I could have either. They're both good. So I guess that's my ramble on standard party roles, is that it only really happens in game systems that are too broad from the get-go, from my experience, and it really only gears you towards combat. Otherwise, you'd be looking at party roles more like what I said in my other video on literary party roles. You know, the leader, the lancer, the comic relief, the brute, the brains, the heart. You know, you gotta have heart in there. And, you know, the one evil party member and the one exotic party member. And, those are like the party roles I could get with. But having like one guy who's mechanically good at this and one guy who's mechanically good at that, it's not very interesting to me in the first place. And if you try to do that a second campaign, it's going to be like watching reruns, and it's going to get boring really quick. So I'd advocate everyone not to do that. Don't fall into habits, you know. Make each group as different from each other as possible. And also, it can be hard to make everyone who are so different. One's a wizard, one's a cleric, one's a rogue, one's a fighter. And those are all very different, you know, characters. And to make them have a reason to get together and travel together, that's doable the first campaign, but the second and the third campaign are like, why would these people be traveling together? It starts to stretch credibility. So it works against your unified themes. Like if I'm running a game where everyone's in the Thieves Guild and they show up with 6 different rogues, that's fine. You know, it makes sense for them to be together. You know, unfortunately in Pathfinder the rogue class is so specific that they're not going to be very different. Like 2 people playing rogues are going to be pretty similar to each other. They both have trap finding and they both have sneak attack. So they're right there. You've got 2 big points of similarity, and you know a character might only have 10 points of unique interest, and if 2 of them are the same, and if 2 of them can't be changed because of the class, you're in some trouble already. But you bring in like a point buy game, you're like, okay, we're in a Thieves Guild. Then you know one guy has the fast talking calm man, one guy has the stealthy assassin, one guy has a trap disabling, trap setting security guy, and another guy might have a safe cracker. And then you can start to bring in other interests as well. But so I'd advocate, first of all, try to stay away from any game that would pigeonhole you so much, like Pathfinder. And second of all, if you are using a game that pigeonholes you, just ignore the mechanical side. Focus on the story, then try to stat it. You're going to have problems with the pigeonhole doing that, but at least your story will still be there for you. Because at the end of the day, you know, 10 years or 20 years down the line, what you're going to remember about the game is not that you had a party composition, and it's not that you dealt this much damage or that you fought this many encounters per session. It's going to be the story that you remember. So contribute to that, make it better. You'll remember it longer. You'll remember it more vividly. So it's kind of a ramble. You know, like I said, I don't like to do negative videos, but I've encountered a couple people just in the last week that they're talking to me about standard party rules as if it's just a given, as if, of course, you have standard party rules, otherwise you'll die in your multiple combats per encounter. And I'm just like, there's so many things wrong with that I thought I'd do a video so I don't have to explain it to everyone. And some of this will be stylistic. Like I said, Thomas loves to run combat-heavy stuff. He loves multiple. From what I gather, I've never actually gamed with him because I don't like online gaming. But from what I gather, he likes you know, power gaming and module style and lots of combat. And you know that can be fine as long as you have some story backing him up. You know, I probably won't even notice. As long as the story's there, that's even fine with me. But even he will agree that party roles are boring and repetitive, and you should build the character that's most interesting. And if everyone shows up with the most interesting character, you're going to have a way better time than if you assign people roles. So I think that's all I got to say about that. Thomas, you can launch a video tirade against me wrestling with role-playing games. You can launch a video tirade about why I'm too cruel and harsh and how I've besmirched the good name of Pathfinder. And I even like Pathfinder. It's just it's not good at certain things. It is good at a lot of other things. But standard party roles is something that really drops the ball in that area. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think. If you love party roles, if you hate them, if you've seen them done well, or if you've seen them done terribly. I want to hear it all because I derive entertainment value out of the comments section. So leave a comment, please. Please leave a comment. And I'm going to stop rambling at you now. But everybody have a good day in YouTube land.